Russia is sinking deeper into crisis, and the cracks are no longer easy to hide. According to the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the Russian economy is facing a systemic collapse, with key industries hemorrhaging profits, banks struggling to stay afloat, and nearly 165,000 companies unable to pay their debts. Even as Moscow tries to project stability, the numbers tell a different story, from energy giants losing billions to service sectors shrinking, and from rising domestic protests to the looming impact of U.S. sanctions. Tonight, we're breaking down how this economic and political storm is shaking Russia and what it means for the war in Ukraine, the global energy market, and the world stage. Stay with us as we dive into the full story. Russia's economy is teetering on the edge of collapse, and the latest intelligence reports paint a grim picture. The Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine revealed that between January and August 2025, the total profit of Russian enterprises fell by 8.3%, signaling a sharp decline in business activity across the country. This isn't just a slowdown, it's a systemic contraction. Roughly 165,000 companies are now unable to service their debts, and 23% of legal entities are considered problematic borrowers. In other words, almost a quarter of Russia's corporate sector is financially unstable, unable to meet basic obligations, and teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Even official statistics can no longer hide the depth of the crisis. The International Monetary Fund predicts Russia's GDP growth will slow to just 0.9% in 2025 and 1.0% in 2026, a stark drop from 4.1% in 2024. Analysts describe the economy as having moved beyond temporary stagnation. Russia is facing structural challenges across nearly every sector. Adding to the pressure, nearly half of the state budget is now being spent on the war in Ukraine, further straining resources and leaving little room to stabilize industries or support struggling businesses. In short, the Russian economy is no longer just slowing down, it is unraveling under the combined weight of prolonged conflict, sanctions, and internal mismanagement. The instability of Russia's economy is spilling directly into its banking sector. Corporate debt is soaring, and short-term liabilities now exceed current assets by 25.6 billion rubles, 5 times higher than last year. This is a clear sign of a liquidity crunch that banks are struggling to manage. Sberbank's CEO, Herman Gref, admitted in September 2025 that Russia's economic growth had effectively come to a halt in the second quarter, a reality that reflects not only on businesses, but also on the financial system tasked with supporting them. With so many companies unable to service their debts, banks are now facing rising defaults, forcing some institutions to brace for potential state intervention to avoid collapse. The ripple effect is severe. When banks falter, access to credit tightens, businesses struggle to finance operations, and consumer confidence plummets. Analysts warn that if the banking system cannot stabilize, even sectors that remain profitable could face significant setbacks. In short, Russia's banking sector is no longer a buffer. It is now another battlefield in the country's deepening economic crisis, directly tied to corporate failures, sanctions pressures, and the staggering costs of war. Russia's oil industry, long considered the backbone of its economy, is now under unprecedented strain. The United States has imposed its first sanctions on Russia since Donald Trump returned to the White House, targeting the country's 2 largest oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. These measures give Washington sweeping authority to pressure overseas subsidiaries and discourage foreign partners from doing business with them, creating uncertainty that ripples across global energy markets. Rosneft and Lukoil together account for roughly 40% of Russia's oil output, and any disruption in their operations has immediate fiscal consequences. Following the sanctions announcement, Lukoil shares fell nearly 9.4%, while Rosneft dropped 7%, reflecting investor concern over looming revenue losses. The sanctions come at a critical time. Russian oil product exports are collapsing. According to Bloomberg and Vortexa data, average seaborne oil product exports over the first 26 days of October 2025 stood at 1.89 million barrels per day, the lowest level since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022. Ukrainian drone strikes on refineries and pipelines have cut crude processing by an estimated 500,000 barrels per day, causing domestic fuel shortages and reducing refined product exports. Even crude exports, while slightly higher at 5.1 million barrels per day, cannot offset the collapse in refined products. Revenue from crude and fuel sales dropped to $13.35 billion in September, down from $13.58 billion in August, while the Ural's crude discount widened to more than $13 per barrel, the largest gap since May 2025. Experts warn that if sanctions, infrastructure attacks, and declining international demand continue, Russia may have to offer deeper discounts or even reduce production, further straining state finances. As one analyst put it, the energy sector, once the guarantor of economic stability, now faces what Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service describes as a strategic collapse. In short, Russia's oil sector is no longer the reliable engine of revenue it once was. Instead, it has become a critical vulnerability, threatening both the country's fiscal health and its geopolitical leverage. While the oil sector grabs headlines, Russia's economic crisis extends far beyond energy. Almost every major industry is experiencing significant losses, painting a picture of systemic decline. Coal industry. Once a reliable source of foreign currency, the coal sector is now hemorrhaging money. According to Ukrainian intelligence, 67% of coal enterprises are unprofitable, with total losses from January to August 2025 reaching 263.2 billion rubles, and a single-month spike of more than 38 billion rubles in August alone. Profits have halved, while losses have grown 2.6 times, turning a previously profitable sector into a burden for the state budget. Service sector. The service industry is also in turmoil. Russian Post reported a 4.5% drop in revenue from core services and a 9.3% decline in financial intermediation. Gross profitability fell 2.5 times, while sales losses jumped 5.7 times to 10.7 billion rubles. Short-term liabilities now exceed current assets by 25.6 billion rubles, 5 times higher than last year, signaling a deep liquidity crisis that the Kremlin cannot hide behind corporate statements about changes in the operating environment. Metallurgy. Norilsk nickel, a flagship of Russia's industrial sector, is similarly weakening. In the first 9 months of 2025, the company's net profit dropped by 39%, while expenses rose 34%. Declining production of nickel, copper, palladium, and platinum underscores the company's weakening position in global markets, threatening Russia's export competitiveness. Energy sector. Beyond oil, even Gazprom, the company that for decades served as the main donor to Russia's state budget, reported a net loss of 170.3 billion rubles over 9 months. The Foreign Intelligence Service noted, for a company that was supposed to guarantee stability, this is not just a failure, it's a strategic collapse. Transport. Russian Railways (RZT) reported losses of 4.2 billion rubles, reflecting the broader decline across industrial sectors. Reduced demand, sanctions, and logistical challenges compound the problem, making transportation an added burden rather than a facilitator of economic growth. Taken together, these losses show that Russia's economic crisis is not isolated to energy or finance. From coal to metallurgy, from services to transport, the picture is the same: falling profits, rising debt, and structural weakness. Analysts warn that without immediate corrective measures, the crisis will continue to deepen, with cascading effects on the Russian population, government revenues, and the country's ability to sustain its war efforts. On top of its internal economic troubles, Russia is now grappling with intensifying international sanctions, especially in the energy sector. In late October 2025, the United States imposed its first sanctions on Russia since Donald Trump's return to the White House, targeting the country's two largest oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. These measures give Washington sweeping authority to pressure overseas subsidiaries and discourage foreign partners from doing business with them, creating uncertainty that reverberates across global markets. The sanctions specifically aim to curb Russia's oil exports to India and China, Moscow's largest buyers, tightening financial pressure on the Kremlin and potentially influencing negotiations over the war in Ukraine. Analysts note that alternative payment routes are limited. Indian rupees are not freely convertible, and trade with India is too small and undiversified to sustain a full barter system. This means even a partial reduction in imports could severely hit Russia's energy revenues. Lukoil has already announced plans to sell its international assets, including stakes in Iraq, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Europe, to mitigate the sanctions' effects. Meanwhile, Rosneft's main foreign asset, a 49% stake in India's Nyara Energy, faces an uncertain future, with no official guidance yet on how the company will navigate the restrictions. The financial implications are severe. Energy revenues account for roughly a quarter of Russia's total federal budget, and any disruption could force the Kremlin to raise taxes or slash spending to balance the 2026 budget. Russian oil production may need to be curtailed if demand fails to pick up elsewhere, while discounts on Urals crude could widen to 20 to 25% below Brent, eroding long-term export earnings. As Sergei Vakulenko, a former Russian oil executive, warns, the sanctions make it practically impossible to pay dividends to the sanctioned companies and complicate dealings with suppliers, banks, and partners. Simply put, sanctions are not just a diplomatic tool, they are a strategic weapon that threatens Russia's fiscal stability and its ability to fund the war effort in Ukraine. The economic collapse and mounting international pressure are not Russia's only challenges. On the streets, a growing wave of dissent is emerging. In mid-October 2025, hundreds of young Russians gathered in St. Petersburg's Kazanskaya Square to protest both the war in Ukraine and President Vladimir Putin's regime. Crowds of students and musicians joined together to perform Cooperative Swan Lake, a song by the exiled rapper Noise MC, banned in Russia and labeled extremist for its sharp criticism of Putin and his inner circle. Its biting lyrics, "Let the old man shake in fear for his lake," mock the Kremlin's grip on power and have become an unofficial anthem for those opposing the war and state repression. Amid the chants and music, one young performer stood out, 18-year-old singer Diana Loginova, known by her stage name Nauko. Her performance of the banned track in central Moscow went viral overnight. But shortly after, Russian authorities detained her, accusing her of promoting extremist content and inciting unrest. This wave of protest underscores a deeper truth. Russia's crisis is no longer just economic, it's social. Discontent is rising among urban youth, who are exhausted by endless war spending, declining living standards, and government corruption. Russia is facing a perfect storm, a collapsing economy, a banking system on the brink, an oil sector under siege from sanctions and attacks, and a population increasingly willing to protest. From coal mines to metallurgical plants, from Russian railways to Gazprom, nearly every corner of the economy is struggling, while the Kremlin spends nearly half its budget on a war that shows no sign of ending. The world is watching closely. How Russia navigates this crisis will shape not only its own future, but also the global energy market and geopolitical balance. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for continuous updates on Russia, Ukraine, and the shifting dynamics of global geopolitics.